Hello, everyone. Bart Sibrel here of the podcast Box Escape, which is a weekly podcast you can only get by subscribing through the link below. However, what we have today is a free episode of Box Escape, wherein I interview someone in the know about the Apollo moon landing fraud and what is going on at the Chinese Space Agency regarding that in their relationship with NASA and the United States. So here you go, free episode of Bart Sibrel's Box Escape. Subscribe link below. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Bart Sibrel here with a special public episode of Box Escape. We have with us a special guest, Rasa Rihari, who is a specialist at the Chinese Space Agency, who has some knowledge of the moon landing fraud, apparently common knowledge among his coworkers. So why don't you first tell us about what you do, and as the story goes along with what China knows about the moon landings.
I was working in this department we call quantum energy, what most people refer to as a free energy technology. So that was my main job. I was working with them, and I met the space agency people back in 2016. But I didn't want to work for them until much later. It wasn't maybe 2022 that I said, okay, what would you guys like for me to do for you? And then they asked me to research what is NASA doing to protect the astronauts from the space radiation on the Artemis missions. So that was the job they gave me. So research the NASA articles in English and just translate that to Chinese. So that's my job here.
Why don't they just use what worked in 1969? It doesn't seem like they would need a new technology, would they? It worked so great. All the guys survived into their 80s and 90s without cancer.
Right. So we all know that there's no way human beings could have survived the radiation back then. There's three kinds of radiations. You have the normal gamma rays and X-rays, and then you have also the solar particle events, and then you also have the galactic cosmic radiation, which there's no protection from that. Whatever kind of shielding you try to put there, it just passes through that and creates a secondary scatter on the inside, which goes right through your DNA. So yeah, there's no way a human being could have survived it back then. And if they do try to send human beings on this Artemis 2, I doubt they're going to be coming back in one piece.
So tell me what these Chinese Space Agency employees told you about their knowledge of the moon landing fraud and the arrangement that they have with NASA to keep it a secret.
Okay, it's kind of a complex story. So there are many space agencies around the world who know that the Apollo missions didn't happen, and the reason they're keeping secret about it is for different reasons. Like, for example, Elon Musk is keeping secret about it because he's got the NASA contract, right? So the way the thing goes is just keep quiet, and then we'll admit it ourselves publicly that we faked the Apollo missions. So this is why people like Elon Musk are lying for NASA, and other countries are also lying for NASA. India is lying for NASA. Japan is lying for NASA. Russia is lying for NASA. Now, China has a different agreement, however. China said, we will not expose it as a hoax, but we will not lie for you. So China has never said the moon landings were real.
From what you told me, they have an agreement to not expose the fact that it was a fraudulent series of missions in exchange for receiving under the table space technology. Can you
Right.
verify that?
Well, yeah, okay. So the people at NASA are, of course, controlled by the United States government, but the people at NASA are mostly scientists, so they're not so much into politics. And back, 10, 12 years ago, the US Congress banned China from the International Space Station. And some of the employees at NASA were not too happy about that. After the US Congress banned NASA from releasing technology to China, then what NASA did is they're just leaking the technology through the European Space Agency. So what that means is that the Chinese space station is actually just a copy of the ISS. And if they wanted to, these two ships could link together because it's the same technology. And the European Space Agency has been training the Chinese astronauts how to go up to the Chinese space station. So that's been going on for quite a long time.
According to congressional law, it's illegal for China to receive space technology about the space station, but they're doing it anyway. And they're just
Right.
having it go through the European Space Agency. Now, what you told me before was that this is active, intentional blackmail from China against the United States to get that technology in exchange for not blowing the whistle on the fact that the Apollo missions were fraudulent. Is that the case?
I wouldn't use the word blackmail there. It's just an agreement they have where, okay, we'll keep quiet until you guys admit it for yourselves. And this is what all the other space agencies are doing.
Right,
Even NASA employees.
but you have to add, and they will keep quiet if the U.S., against congressional law, meaning illegally, send them space technology that they're not supposed to receive legally or otherwise. They will continue to remain quiet if they receive that technology, which is illegal for the government to give them. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can put it that way. It is, according to the U.S. law, presently, it is illegal, but that's just a U.S. law. It's not an international law.
Right, but it's the U.S. citizens who are working for the government who are violating the own law that they wrote through Congress. And they're doing that because China knows that the moon missions are fake, and they have agreed not to say so publicly as long as they receive this illegal technology on how to build a space station better. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can put it that way.
Well, there
Like
you
I
go.
said,
Then that's correct. China is blackmailing
yeah,
the United States, and the federal government is violating their own Espionage Act in the process. What a surprise. The government is full of hypocrites.
yeah. So, like I said, it's in the scientific community. Whether it's the European Space Agency or the India or Japan, these scientists have this kind of a unwritten agreement. It's a friendly thing. Okay, let's just keep quiet
Oh, well,
because
yes, my
NASA has
blackmailers are
promised.
very friendly. They take me out to lunch all the time. They're great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. Anyhow, so like the intention of China is not to blackmail. I mean, it's like it's just a friendly agreement. Like, okay, we'll keep quiet for you because we promised we would.
In exchange for receiving technology that is illegal for the United
Right.
States to give them.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Definitely.
Maybe that's white mail. I'm not sure. But in any case, what other experiences would you like to share specifically about China's knowledge? You told me basically that everybody in the Chinese Space Agency knows that the Apollo missions were fake. Is that pretty much the case?
Right. But within China, we don't. The people who work for the Chinese Space Agency, we don't uh, publicly announce that it was a hoax. Right. We don't we don't educate people that there are Chinese web pages which talk about it being a hoax, but these web pages are not made by Chinese space agency employees because we're not supposed to be. It would be ungentlemanly of us if we did that publicly, exposing it as a hoax.
Any other comments that you'd like to share?
Actually, I have some questions for you if you don't mind.
Oh, no, I'm on the spot. Okay, go ahead.
So, my first question is, I'd actually like to hear more about your story about, when the CIA had imprisoned you and, you know, that whole story. I mean, most of my followers from my Facebook page are familiar with, they've read your book and stuff, but it's just, I don't know. I want to hear more about that story. It seems like there needs to be some more details that we all want to hear about.
Yes, well, when you have 2 weeks, I will be glad to tell you that story. Uh, so
It's a
you
long
haven't read the
story.
book? You haven't read the chapter "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to CNN" and "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Church"? Because I go into pretty good detail in those chapters in the book,
Yeah,
Sibrel.com.
it, right. It's just I have some kind of specific questions. Like at one point, you said that there was kind of a two factions within the government, and one of them chose to bail you out, essentially, and save you from that other faction which had imprisoned you.
Yeah, that's correct. So I have to interpret what that means. Basically, when I was being illegally kidnapped, two people, as best as I could tell, who worked for what was called the MCIA, the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity Department. They literally kidnapped me from the kidnappers, you could say, and gave me a debriefing. We're very concerned for my health because the other party had drugged me illegally. They took my blood pressure. I think they might have been medical personnel as well as intelligence personnel. And so I got the impression there were like good spies, bad spies within the federal government, which there probably are. I mean, most people, I believe, maybe I'm naive, try to do what is right and good. The problem is that you only have to control two political parties to control the federal government. It's
Yeah.
pretty simple. Just ask Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul if that's not the case, because Hillary Clinton was getting half as many votes as Bernie Sanders, but she got twice as many delegates anyway. And then Ron Paul was winning all the first straw polls primaries, and yet they listed him as last in every single news network, you see. So they're corrupt on both sides. So it appears to me that even though most people are honest and good, if you can control the president, then that corrupt president appoints the corrupt leaders of the FBI, the CDC, the FDA, and so forth. And people who are honest in the FBI said, look, we had proof of a senator taking bribes, but we were told if we pursued it, we'd be fired. So they backed down. So it's actually pretty easy to control the government, even though there are mostly honest workers in it, because the people at the top controlling the control valves are the corrupt ones. And that's the case to this day. So when things like the moon landing fraud happened, Kennedy assassination, 9/11, or whatever, where intelligent people, honest people in the government saw what was really going on, apparently they created a separate faction. If domestic people, which appears to be the case, brought down the buildings on 9/11, they had control over military assets. They had control over NORAD and fighter jets and satellites. So maybe the good people in the government who are opposed to them have such control as well. And so when I was being detained for trying to get proof of the moon landing fraud to CNN, a tape we discovered of them faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes, apparently this other group came in to make sure I was okay. And all this is, talked about in great detail in my book at Sibrel.com. And it's really the first time I ever publicly talked about it. I already figured, hey, I'm trying to get people to accept a very bizarre truth. They really did fake the moon landing. I don't want to make that any more difficult than going into the CIA, abducted me and gave me truth serum to find out where the originals of this tape were. But that did happen. So Moon Man goes into great detail about that, including, as you know, the deathbed confession of an eyewitness who saw them film the first fake moon landing at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968 and said so as he was dying, that he even murdered a coworker to cover it up, which, you don't make this stuff up as you're a day or an hour away from meeting your maker and fearing the judgment to come. So the saddest thing about the moon landing fraud is that it's true. I mean, who would have thought they really did fake the moon landing? You cannot have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969, when all of NASA has 1 millionth the computing power cell phone, than you can today with 5 decades better rockets and computers, where they can send astronauts only 1,000th the distance to the moon, despite having 5 decades of better technology. You cannot have better technology in the past and in the future,
Right.
which means it was a bluff, like in poker. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And Eugene Krantz said a person in the command center can tell no difference between a practice flight and a real one. So if they can't tell the difference, I don't think people at home as a 10-year-old watching it from their living room can tell. And there's no
Yeah.
independent press coverage. There's just a TV picture coming from the Nixon administration that we have to assume is factual.
Sorry, I have a question. I wanted to come back to your story about the abduction. Okay, it's the thing is that it's just my own personal question, but regarding these two factions in the government, and the one of them stepped in to help you and pull you out of there, was it due to the fact that you were Christian?
Well, I got the, you could say, spiritual impression that these were godly people. And to tell you the truth, belief in God is not religious, it's secular. Either things made themselves, and somehow a lower form of life without a brain can create a higher form of life with a brain, and a flower and a bee, which are totally dependent on one another, somehow coincidentally evolved on their own without knowing about the other. So, if there is a God, a divine creator, just because we can't understand it doesn't mean it's not true. And so, whether there's a divine creator is really a secular issue. Religion has given God a bad name, really, for the most part. It does appear that there might have been, that affiliation, you could say. The reason why I originally turned down this project, when Bill Casey, who worked at NASA, who saw that it was a fraud, asked me to do a film about it, I turned it down for fear that it could be true. And if I start looking into it, it could be dangerous. But when I realized that I'm going to die anyway, and that a judgment for how we live our lives just seems logical. And here's the most important thing, Rasa, that the faking of the moon landing is so much more profound historically than if they had actually gone. Do you see that? Either they planted a flag, came back, whoa, that was a close one, or they lied to the whole world, the country that claims to be the greatest. The greatest accomplishment of mankind, like the ship that God Himself could not sink, the Titanic, which sunk, you see, that Nixon called the man on the moon the greatest event in the history of the world, second only to God making the universe. You see, the fact that mankind's greatest boast is part of his folly and fall and deceitfulness, and that they really did fake the moon landing. That is so much more profound historically than if they'd actually gone. So I changed my mind. 5 years later, I said, I'm going to die anyway. This is important. We can have a great awakening about everything. But if people still think, because it's a pleasant lie, that the moon missions are real, we will always have a corrupt government. We have to acknowledge it. It has to come out. And it's really the linchpin. You see, it's the finger out of the dike that will bring all the corruption down, because it will enrage people. I had two NBC news directors say emphatically the tape I uncovered proves beyond any doubt the moon missions were fake. One said it would bring down the federal government if the truth came out. At first, I didn't believe him, but maybe it would. Maybe it'll crash the stock market. Maybe the dollar will crash. I don't know. However, they did fake the moon landing. That's a fact, whether you realize it or not. And that fact should be known by humanity and acknowledged if we ever expect to make progress as a species. I would say, standing up for what is right and factual is probably a better call. Let's not be like Eisenhower, who warned the world his last day in office to protect his own life when he was going to die anyway, and then face judgment for having lived cowardly, because who are not in the kingdom of God? The immoral people, the thieves, the liars, and the cowardly. I originally turned down making a funny thing happen on the way to the moon for fear that it could be deadly. Then I realized I'm going to die anyway. I might as well go out in a blaze of glory for what is right. And so I changed my mind. And I ended up, who knew it? I did risk my life for the truth. So what? I would rather die for what is right. I remember this time, Rasa, I was going through this seminar, try to, think outside the box and push your fears and things like that. So I never parachuted, right? So I wanted to parachute because I was afraid to do it. So I intentionally kept doing everything I was afraid of over and over and over again. So I go up there and looking down out of the airplane, if you could see a little square there, that's about 15 acres, you know, from that point of view. And I'm like, I'm not jumping out of this airplane. So the way they did it back then, there was no tandem jumping. You literally went out on the wing of the plane by yourself, waiting for a hand signal to be over the right area so you wouldn't land on a power line. And so you had a few seconds there, and I'm thinking, I could work my way back in this airplane. I can put my foot back in there. Don't have to do this. And I was even thinking, these people have seen people chicken out before. No big deal. They'll forget about me. And then I realized if I did that, that would be my memory for the rest of my life. And I realized I would rather die than be a coward. And that's why the cowardly is listed first of the people who will not make it into eternal life. And how did the world leaders trick people into taking a medicine for an illness they didn't even have? Out of fear of death. The Bible says that Satan has a tool, the number one tool to hold mankind in slavery. And it's their fear of death. No belief in God, fear of death. All I have is this life. Belief in God and justice and righteousness and reward, then I'm not afraid to die. We're going to die anyway. You see that? Eisenhower did not see that. He made a mistake. You see, we need to tell the truth about the moon landing fraud, all of our sin, all of our mistakes. So what? We're in the boat with everybody else, right? And pray for people who run the world that they'll do what is right. And hopefully the truth about the moon landing fraud will come out to put America in its rightful place and to humble mankind and to show us who we really are. You can't have cancer and not know about it and expect to have a fulfilling life. You have to deal with it. Sooner is better than later.
Good luck with everything coming up, and I hope we can do another interview soon.
Yes, if you know of any Chinese millionaires who want to give me $5 million for a beautiful screenplay I felt was divinely inspired, then let me know. And I've got a producer and actor ready to start tomorrow once we get the money in the bank.
Wow. I don't know any Chinese film directors, but I know some investor groups who could maybe introduce that offer to people.
Definitely.
So yeah, that would be amazing if that happened for you. Yeah, I'll definitely try to help.
Let me tell the world leaders, I will never, ever, ever talk about the moon landing fraud ever again if I start fulfilling my dream of being a feature filmmaker of fiction. I'll shut up. So give me the money. Thank you very much. And there you have it. This free episode of Bart Sibrel's Box Escape, a weekly podcast that you can only get through the subscribe link below. Take care.